My name is Margaret Grayson, and the day I saw the for sale sign standing crooked in Grandpa's front yard was the day I realized my family's light had gone out. The funeral lilies were still wilting in the trash, the coffee urns still warm at the church hall, but my cousin Lydia had already moved on. From the sidewalk, I could see her through the window, laughing with two strangers under the porch light, like it was just another evening. The same light Grandpa used to leave on for me when I came home late from school. I stood there watching, clutching my coat tighter, wondering when home had stopped being ours. The house on Maple and Fifth was older than I was. Grandpa built it himself after returning from the war, pale, clapboard-wide porch, a swing that never stopped squeaking. As a kid, I used to help him polish the brass knob on the front door every spring, and he'd say, "Keep the shine, Maggie, and the house will always welcome you back." He didn't talk much, but when he did, he meant it. So when I saw that sign crooked, nailed into the cold ground like an afterthought, I felt something twist inside me, not grief, but betrayal. Lydia came out to the porch, still in her black dress, her face lit by that yellow bulb. "You came back," she said, smiling too easily. I asked her who the people inside were. She waved a hand. "Buyers," she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The lawyer said we can proceed. Grandpa's will was clear. I'm the executor. You know how messy upkeep is on this place. Executor. Buyers. Proceed. Words that belonged to people who never grew up on that porch. I didn't argue then. I just looked past her into the living room, where strangers were tracing their fingers over the mantel that still smelled faintly of wood polish and pipe smoke. Grandpa's picture was gone from the wall. Lydia must have taken it down already. I wanted to ask her how she could laugh inside a house that still echoed with him. Instead, I said nothing and walked to my car. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in my apartment, the fridge hum, the ticking clock, felt foreign. At midnight, I drove back to the house. The porch light was still on. The for sale sign leaned further, half sunk in the mud. I sat in my car and watched the window curtains move with the breeze. Grandpa used to say, "The house listens when we sleep." I wondered what it was hearing now. The next morning, I showed up early, before Lydia arrived. I had the old key still on my ring. Inside, dust floated through the slanted light, soft as breath. The floors creaked the same way they always had, like they remembered me. In the kitchen, the clock on the wall had stopped 4:23, the hour Grandpa died according to the hospice nurse. The silence pressed heavy, but not empty. It was waiting. In the corner by the window sat Grandpa's toolbox, the same metal one he carried to every neighbor's house when they called for help. I ran my hand over the lid, cool and familiar. Inside were screws measuring tape, a folded paper, a note in his handwriting. "Keep it standing, Maggie. Houses fall when hearts do." The ink had faded, but the words cut clean. When Lydia came, she wasn't happy to find me there. "You shouldn't be here," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "It's still Grandpa's house," I answered. "Not anymore," she shot back. "The paperwork's in motion." She poured herself coffee like it was her kitchen now. "What paperwork?" I asked. She sighed, tired of explaining as if I were a child again. "The estate lawyer filed the sale authorization. It's cleaner this way. No probate mess." I wanted to tell her about the note, but something stopped me. It wasn't proof, not in the way she cared about. She had documents, signatures, legalese. All I had was Grandpa's handwriting and a memory of promises made under this roof. After she left, I walked out to the porch. The light bulb above me flickered once, twice, then steadied a warm, steady glow against the gray morning. I watched it for a long time, thinking how Grandpa used to say, "As long as that light's on, someone's still home." The realtor's car pulled up later that afternoon, tires crunching the gravel. A woman in a tan coat stepped out, clipboard in hand. She smiled politely when she saw me. "You must be the co-owner," she asked. For a moment, I wanted to lie to say yes, but the truth hung heavier. "Not yet," I said quietly, "but I'm not leaving." That evening, I stayed on the porch long after sunset. Fireflies blinked over the yard. The sign still stood crooked, leaning toward the house like it wanted to listen too. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice beneath the crickets, steady, practical kind. "A house isn't sold, Maggie. It's handed over." Maybe he knew one day I'd need to remember that. When I finally drove away, the porch light glowed in my rearview mirror until it vanished behind the trees. It wasn't just a bulb. It was a promise, and I wasn't done keeping it yet. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, heart thudding, like I'd left something undone, and I had. I couldn't stop seeing that porch light in my mind, the one that refused to die even when everything else did. I made coffee, left it untouched, and drove back to Grandpa's house with the same determination people get when they're about to do something they shouldn't. The street was quiet. Maple and Fifth always was in the early hours. The houses all looked the same as they had for 40 years, except for Grandpa's, which now had a crooked sign and a car with a realtor's logo parked out front. I parked behind it, stepped onto the porch, and for a moment it felt like walking into a photograph, frozen but alive somehow. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and old pine. Someone had been through here again, Lydia, maybe the realtor. I heard the hum of the refrigerator and the slow creak of floorboards as I walked room to room, touching what I could. The house felt smaller without Grandpa in it, as if grief had shrunk the walls. When I reached the den, I saw the photo albums stacked in a box marked "Donate." I sat on the floor, flipped through one, and found a picture of Grandpa and Lydia at her high school graduation. His arm was around her shoulder, and his other hand rested on the porch railing behind them, steady, protective. Then another photo, Grandpa and me sitting on the same porch, swing me holding a glass of lemonade, and looking up at him like he held all the answers in the world. He used to say the difference between a house and a home is who's willing to fix what's broken. I whispered that out loud just to hear it again. Then the front door opened. Maggie Lydia's voice echoed through the hall. I didn't answer right away. She found me sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by photographs. "You can't keep showing up here," she said. "The buyers are coming back this week." "Already?" I asked. She shrugged. "It's what Grandpa would have wanted. He didn't want this place to become a burden." I looked at her hair, done, nails perfect, the black funeral dress replaced by designer jeans. "You sure you're not just tired of remembering him?" Her face hardened. "Don't start, Maggie. You didn't handle any of the hospital bills or the cleanup. You didn't see how bad it got." "That doesn't mean you get to erase him," I said. "Or his house." She glanced at the photos, then back at me. "We need to move on, both of us." I thought of Grandpa's note. Keep it standing. Maggie. Move on. That wasn't what he'd taught us. When she left again, slamming the door behind her, I went to the kitchen and found Grandpa's ledger still in the drawer. He'd written everything down, repairs costs, even who helped him build the fence in 1963. The last page had his handwriting shakier than I remembered. Talk to Mr. Benson before the winter. Papers in the small drawer. I froze. The small drawer wasn't in the kitchen. It was in his workshop out back, the one that had stayed locked for months. I walked through the yard, the grass soft under my shoes. The shed door creaked like it was waiting for me. Inside, the smell of motor oil and sawdust hit like memory. I found the drawer tucked under the old workbench, half jammed. Inside were 2 envelopes, both yellowed with time. One was empty. The other was sealed, labeled Estate, to be opened by Margaret Grayson. My hands trembled as I slid my nail under the flap. Inside wasn't a will, it was a letter. Grandpa's handwriting again, uneven, but firm. Maggie, this house stands because you loved it like I did. If something happens to me, promise me you'll keep the light on until you're sure it's safe to turn it off. The lawyer has a copy of everything. Don't let anyone rush you out. The right things take time. I read it twice, then 3 times. The lawyer, Mr. Benson. The man Lydia said had already handled everything. That afternoon, I drove to Benson and Yates Legal on Main Street. The secretary, a young man with slick hair and a nervous smile, told me Mr. Benson was in a meeting. I waited anyway. After half an hour, Benson himself came out, tall, gray-haired, the kind of man who always smelled like paper and polish. "Margaret," he said, as if surprised to see me. "I was sorry to hear about your grandfather. A good man." He thought so too. I said, then handed him the letter. "He mentions you and something about a copy of his papers." He looked at it, his expression tightening just enough to notice. "That letter isn't a legal document," he said. "The estate was processed per the valid will. Was there more than one?" I asked. He hesitated, then smiled too carefully. "Sometimes there are drafts, but what's filed is what matters." "Could I see them?" "I'm afraid that's confidential," he said, straightening his tie. I didn't push further. I just looked him in the eye long enough to make him uncomfortable, then thanked him and left. Outside, the air felt heavy like rain coming. That night, back on Grandpa's porch, I sat with the letter in my lap. The bulb above me buzzed, then steadied. I whispered, "I found it, Grandpa." And for the first time since the funeral, I felt like he was listening. But I also knew something else. Now Lydia wasn't just selling too fast. She was selling on purpose. Someone wanted that house gone before the truth caught up. And if Grandpa's light was still shining, maybe it was time I made sure the right people saw it. The next morning, the sky over Maple Street hung low and pale, the kind that promised rain but never delivered it. I sat in my car outside the courthouse, holding a styrofoam cup of coffee gone cold. The letter from Grandpa lay folded beside me, its edges worn soft from my hands. I had read it so many times I could recite every line. Inside the clerk's office, the air smelled like toner and old paper. I gave the woman at the counter Grandpa's full name and the property address. She adjusted her glasses and began typing, nails clicking against the keyboard. "You're the granddaughter?" she asked without looking up. "Yes. I just need to confirm the deed records," I said. After a moment, she frowned. This property was marked for expedited sale executor request, filed 2 days before the funeral. I blinked. "That can't be right." "It's what's on file," she said, turning the monitor toward me. Lydia's name was listed as executor with a signature date 3 days before Grandpa's death. "Looks like your cousin filed early authorization." I left the office with copies of the forms in a manila envelope. The signature at the bottom, Lydia A. Rowe, was neat, deliberate. But there was another line below, it faded pencil marks like someone had written and erased something. I couldn't make it out, but it didn't look like Grandpa's writing. As I walked down Main Street, the wind carried the smell of fried dough from the diner across the corner. The same place Grandpa and I used to stop after church on Sundays. I went in, partly because my hands were shaking too hard to drive. The waitress, an older woman with a beehive hairdo, recognized me right away. Margaret haven't seen you since the service. Your granddad was a good man." "Thanks, Shirley," I said softly. She poured me coffee without asking. "You holding up okay? I'm trying," I said. "But something doesn't feel right." "About the house." Shirley leaned on the counter. "Honey, half the town knows Lydia's been talking about selling since before he passed. Some folks thought it was strange, but nobody wanted to say anything." My stomach tightened. "Before he passed?" She nodded. "Yeah. She came in here with that lawyer, Mr. Benson, maybe a week before the funeral. I heard her say something about needing quick signatures before the holidays. That was all I needed to hear." I thanked Shirley, left a few bills under the cup, and drove straight to the law office again. The secretary looked surprised to see me so soon. "He's out to lunch," he said quickly. "Where, probably at the Elk Diner," he muttered. The Elk Diner was across town, a small place with vinyl booths and the smell of bacon grease in the air. When I walked in, Mr. Benson was there, not alone, but sitting with Lydia. Her laughter carried through the room like a cracked bell. They both froze when they saw me. Margaret, Lydia said, recovering first. "You're following me now." I ignored her. "Mr. Benson," I said calmly, "we need to talk about those papers you filed." He sighed his fork halfway to his mouth. "This really isn't the place." "Then when?" He set down his napkin. "Fine. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. I nodded and walked out, my pulse drumming in my ears. The sky had darkened by the time I reached my car. For the first time, I understood what Grandpa meant by houses fall when hearts do. It wasn't just about nails and wood, it was about trust. And ours had cracked. That night, I pulled out every piece of paper I had. Grandpa's note, Lydia's authorization form, the copied deed. I laid them side by side on the kitchen table. The dates didn't add up. The notarized line on the deed said, "Witnessed by R. Bennett." I didn't recognize the name. After an hour of searching through old records, I found him Raymond Bennett, a retired notary who used to handle small-town estate papers. His number was still listed. I called, and after a few rings, a shaky voice answered. "Mr. Bennett, my name is Margaret Grayson. You notarized a document for my cousin Lydia Rowe about my grandfather's house." A pause. "Ah, yes, I remember. She came by with Mr. Benson. That was the day before the old man passed, wasn't it?" "Yes," I said carefully. "Did you see my grandfather sign?" He hesitated. "Well, I was told he had already signed. They just needed me to stamp the papers. Said he was bedridden and couldn't come in." My chest went cold. "Did you verify that he sighed?" "Young lady, I trusted Mr. Benson. Known him 30 years. I thanked him and hung up, hands trembling. Grandpa's letter wasn't just a sentimental note, it was a warning. I drove back to the house again. The porch light was off this time, maybe burned out, maybe switched off by Lydia. The air smelled like wet leaves and regret. I sat on the steps, thinking about Grandpa's words. "Don't let anyone rush you out." The next morning, I arrived at Benson's office before he did. He walked in at exactly 9, carrying a briefcase that looked too heavy for what it held. "Margaret," he said tightly. "Let's be civil." Of course I said, setting the copied forms on his desk. "Tell me about this authorization. Who signed it?" When he adjusted his glasses, "The executor has full rights. Even when the testator isn't aware the papers exist," I asked. He stopped, lips parting slightly. I leaned forward. "Mr. Bennett told me Grandpa never signed those papers." "You did. You witnessed a forgery." The silence that followed was long enough to hear the clock ticking behind him. Finally, he said, "Be careful with accusations like that." I stood up. "I'll be careful when I have the truth." I left his office shaking both from fear and something fiercer. I knew I didn't have proof yet, but I had the truth in my gut. Grandpa built that house with his hands, and I'd be damned if I let anyone sell it with lies. That night, I replaced the porch bulb myself, twisting it until it flickered back to life. The yellow light washed over the crooked sign, the same one that had been waiting for me all along. That night, I stayed in the house for the first time since Grandpa passed. The place felt both alive and hollow, as if it were holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I'd brought a sleeping bag, a thermos of coffee, and the courage I'd been pretending to have for weeks. The air inside carried a chill that no heater could push away. I didn't mind. I needed the quiet to think. The moonlight spilled through the lace curtains, tracing patterns on the floorboards. I lay awake on the old couch, staring at the ceiling beams Grandpa had carved himself. Every creak of the wood sounded like memory. I must have drifted off sometime after midnight because when I woke, the porch light was glowing again, even though I hadn't turned it on. I stood at the window watching it flicker once, twice, then steady into a warm hum. It reminded me of Grandpa's voice, low, patient, unshakable. He'd always said light was honest, that it shows what needs fixing. I took it as a sign. Maybe it was sentimental, or maybe grief makes people reach for patterns that comfort them. But that glow told me I wasn't done. At sunrise, I climbed into the attic. The air was thick with dust boxes stacked to the beams. I opened one marked winter coats and found envelopes tucked between them, old tax records letters, and one unsealed note written in Grandpa's shaky hand. If this house stands, it's because of the ones who never walked away. To whoever finds this, keep it steady. It's not walls that hold it up. It's memory. Beneath it, wrapped in a folded napkin, was a small brass key labeled desk. My pulse quickened. I knew which desk, the one in Grandpa's study, the same one Lydia had emptied after the funeral. I unlocked the top drawer and found nothing but stationery and pens. But the second drawer stuck halfway. When I tugged it open, a thin manila folder slipped out. Inside was a second letter, addressed to Mr. Harlan Benson. My breath caught as I read, "Harlan, if I don't make it to the office before the week's end, please file both documents. Maggie and Lydia share the house equally. Maggie will take care of maintenance. Lydia can decide to sell later if she wishes. Fairness matters more than speed." The paper was dated just 4 days before his death, and it bore Grandpa's real signature. My throat tightened. Benson had known. I spent the rest of the morning photocopying every page at the town library. The librarian, Mrs. Campbell, asked if I was working on a project. I just smiled and said, "Family history." That afternoon, Lydia called. Her tone was sharp. "Were you at the house last night?" "Yes," I said. "Margaret, you can't just barge in whenever you feel like it. The sale is almost final." "Then you should probably pause it," I said. "And why would I do that?" "Because you might be selling something you don't entirely own." There was silence on the line, then a soft exhale. "You're bluffing." I didn't answer. Let her wonder. By evening, I sat again on the porch, the letter in my lap. The porch light hummed above me, and for a moment I swore I smelled Grandpa's aftershave, faint, clean, familiar. Maybe it was my imagination. Or maybe some memories refused to fade quietly. A car pulled into the driveway, a silver sedan. Lydia stepped out, her heels crunching the gravel. She stood at the bottom of the porch steps, arms crossed. "You think you found something that changes everything?" "I think I found the truth," I said. "You can't prove anything. Grandpa didn't file that second letter, did he?" "Not yet," I said. "But I can prove Benson had it." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. Do you really want to ruin your own family over a pile of wood and memories? It's not about the house, I said quietly. It's about what it means when you lie to sell what someone else built. Her shoulders dropped for a moment. For the first time, she looked less angry and more tired. You don't understand, she said. I need the money. My kids' tuition. The mortgage. You could have told me, I said. I would have helped. Would you? You always thought Grandpa loved you more. That hit harder than I expected. He didn't love me more, Lydia. He just trusted I'd keep what he built standing. She shook her head. You're living in the past, Maggie. He's gone. I looked at the porch light above us. Maybe. But he left it on for a reason. Lydia turned to leave, but stopped halfway. You won't win this, she said. Maybe not, I said. But I'll make sure the truth gets heard. When she drove off, I stayed on the steps, the night air cooling the anger in my chest. For the first time since all this began, I didn't feel helpless, just steady. Like the house itself was lending me its backbone. Later that night, I called Mr. Benson's office. The secretary answered, and I told her I needed to schedule an appointment for the next morning. When she asked the reason, I said simply, "It's about a missing document." There was a long pause before she whispered, "I think he's been expecting you." I hung up and sat in the dark, the light above me humming faintly like a heartbeat. Grandpa's words circled in my mind. A house isn't sold, it's handed over. Tomorrow I'd find out exactly who took it out of our hands. Morning came with a heavy fog that rolled over Maple Street and wrapped the houses in pale gray. It was the kind of morning that made everything seem slower, like time itself was waiting. I parked outside Benson's office before he arrived. The brass letters on the door, Benson and Yates Legal, had started to fade, as if the truth inside had been wearing them down for years. When he finally walked in, he didn't look surprised to see me. Maybe he'd already guessed I'd found something. "Margaret," he said, forcing a polite smile. "I assume this isn't a social call." "No," I said. "It's not." He motioned me into his office. The blinds were half closed, the morning light cutting in thin lines across the stacks of paper. He closed the door and gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "You seem determined to make this difficult," he said. "I just want what's right," I replied, placing Grandpa's second letter on the desk between us. His eyes flicked to the paper and back to me. "Where did you get that?" "In the house?" "In the desk drawer he told you to file." His jaw tightened. "That's not a legal document." "But you read it," I said, "and you ignored it." He leaned back, folding his hands. "Mrs. Grayson, I don't appreciate the implication. I'm not implying anything, I said quietly. I'm stating it. Grandpa trusted you, and you betrayed that trust. You let Lydia file the sale knowing there was another directive." He looked away, then sighed, not like a guilty man, but like one who'd run out of energy to lie. "You think this was my idea," he said. "Your cousin was desperate. She said your grandfather wanted her to sell quickly. She brought me papers signed and notarized. I should have verified them, yes, but I didn't. I didn't think she'd forge his signature," I said, finishing for him. He didn't deny it. I pulled the copies of the deed from my bag and slid them across the desk. "You're going to fix this. Quietly, if possible." He hesitated, then nodded once. "Give me a few days. I'll need to check the registry." "You've had weeks," I said, standing. "I'll give you 2. As I turned to leave, he said something softer, almost to himself. "Your grandfather was the only honest man I ever worked for." Outside, the fog had lifted. The air felt different, cleaner. I drove back to the house, the tires crunching on the gravel drive, and there, as if waiting for me, was Lydia's car. She stood by the crooked sign, arms folded, eyes rimmed red. "You went to Benson," she said. "Yes. He called me. Said you're threatening legal action." "I'm not threatening," I said. "I'm protecting what's ours." She laughed, but it came out tired. "You don't get it, do you? Grandpa's gone. The house doesn't care who owns it." I stepped closer, looking past her at the porch. "You're wrong. Some places remember." Her voice cracked. "I can't afford to keep it, Maggie. You think I want to do this? She stopped shaking her head. "You always had the easier life. Grandpa paid for your nursing school, not mine. You got out. I stayed here." "That's not true," I said, but even as I said it, I knew part of it was. Grandpa had helped me more. Maybe because I'd been around when he needed it, maybe because I'd listened when he talked. Either way, it didn't change what was right. "I'm not taking the house from you," I said softly. "I just want it to stay in the family, both our names like he wrote." She stared at me, uncertain, like she didn't know whether to believe me or hate me. "What if you win?" she asked. "What happens then?" "Then we fix what's broken?" I said. That night I invited her back inside. The house smelled like old coffee and dust, but it felt more alive than it had in weeks. I turned on the porch light steady and bright, and we sat in silence for a while. Lydia finally said, "I remember him sitting there every night. He'd watch the road until we came home from school. Said he could tell which one of us it was by the sound of our footsteps." I smiled faintly. He was usually right. She looked down. "You think he'd forgive me? I think he already has," I said. That's the kind of man he was. We sat there until the light outside started to hum from the moths circling it. For a moment, it felt like Grandpa was there with us, not angry, just patient, waiting for us to remember what family was supposed to mean. The next day, Lydia called off the showing. I didn't ask how she explained it to the realtor. Maybe she said we needed more time, or maybe she told the truth. Either way, it didn't matter. The house would stay standing a little longer. That evening, Mr. Benson called. His voice was steadier this time, but still cautious. "I reviewed the documents," he said. "Your grandfather's original transfer was valid. The second document was indeed misplaced by my office. So what happens now, I'll file a correction deed. You and your cousin will co-own the property. No sale can proceed without both signatures." When I hung up, I didn't feel triumph, just a quiet kind of peace. The house was safe, not forever, maybe not even for long, but safe enough for now. As the sun dipped low, I walked outside and touched the for sale sign. The wood was rough, the letters starting to peel. I straightened it, pressing the stake deeper into the soil until it stood firm and upright. Then I turned on the porch light. It glowed steady in the dusk, not for sale anymore, not lost, not gone, just home again. Mr. Benson's correction paperwork came through 2 weeks later. A thick envelope arrived at my apartment, postmarked from the county clerk's office. Inside were 2 copies of the new deed, both listing Margaret L. Grayson and Lydia A. Rowe as joint owners of the property at 117 Maple and 5th. I held the paper for a long moment, running my fingers over the embossed seal. It felt heavier than it should have, maybe because it carried not just a name, but every argument, every night spent on that porch, every ounce of justice Grandpa had tried to leave behind. I called Lydia that same afternoon. She didn't answer, so I drove straight to the house. Her car was there, parked crooked by the curb. Through the window, I saw her sitting at the kitchen table with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, one already half empty. When I knocked, she didn't look surprised, just tired. I guess you won, she said as I stepped inside. No, I said. We both did. She let out a dry laugh. That's not how it feels. I sat down across from her and laid the new deed between us. This is what Grandpa wanted. You know that. Lydia stared at it like she was reading a language she'd forgotten. Do you ever think about how we ended up here? She asked. Two girls raised under the same roof, one gets out, the other gets stuck. Maybe this house was cursed long before either of us fought over it. Maybe, I said quietly. But curses break when someone decides to stop repeating them. She poured a little more wine into my glass, and for the first time in years, we drank together, not in celebration, not in grief, but in the awkward space between the two. Afterward, we walked the yard in silence. The for sale sign was still there, though the wind had knocked it crooked again. Lydia reached down and steadied it this time, her hands shaking. You always said. Grandpa left that light on for you? She murmured. For us, I corrected. He left it on for both of us. We just forgot how to see it. That evening, I stayed after she went to bed. I wandered through the rooms, touching the door frames, listening to the quiet. The house had a different sound now, softer, less defensive. Like it could breathe again. In Grandpa's old study, I opened the desk one last time. There, under the felt mat, I found a small photograph I'd never noticed before Lydia and me on the porch steps one summer when we were kids holding lemonade jars. Grandpa must have tucked it away years ago. On the back in his handwriting were the words, "They'll figure it out someday." I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. We're trying, Grandpa, I whispered. The next morning, I went into town. Word travels fast in small places, especially when family business spills into legal offices and coffee counters. When I walked into Shirley's diner, a few people turned to look, but nobody said much. Shirley came over with a pot of coffee and a grin. Heard you straightened things out, she said. Mostly, I said. She leaned closer. Your granddad would be proud. That house has stood longer than any of us expected. I nodded. It'll keep standing, at least as long as the light stays on. On my way out, I ran into Mr. Benson by the door. His face looked older, his shoulders heavier. I filed everything this morning, he said. You won't have any more trouble from me. I know, I said. Thank you. He hesitated, then added softly. You were right. Some things matter more than procedure. When I returned to Maple Street that evening, the sun was setting behind the row of houses, turning every porch light into a soft gold flame. I parked, stood at the edge of the yard, and looked at the house that had caused so much pain, so much noise, and yet somehow had survived all of it. Lydia came out onto the porch. I talked to the kids, she said. Told them we'd keep the house for now, maybe visit in the summers. I smiled. That sounds right. She nodded. I'll handle the taxes. You handle the roof. Deal, deal. We stood side by side as the light came on above us. The bulb buzzed once, then glowed steady, the same warm yellow that had been shining through our entire lives. I reached over and put my hand on the porch railing. He'd be happy, I said. Lydia looked at me, her voice quiet. You really think so? I know, so I said. As night settled over Maple Street, the glow from the porch spilled onto the yard, soft and even. Across the street, the neighbors had turned on their own lights one by one until the whole block shimmered faintly under the Indiana sky. It felt like the town itself had exhaled a sigh of relief, of forgiveness, of things put right. I sat down on the swing, the chains creaking softly. Lydia went inside, and for a moment it was just me and the house, the air, the quiet hum of a light that refused to burn out. Grandpa used to say that every house had its own kind of heartbeat. You just had to be still enough to hear it. That night, sitting there under that steady bulb, I heard it clearly. slow, honest, alive. The first real snow of the year came a few weeks later. The flakes fell slow and quiet, blanketing Maple Street like forgiveness. The for sale sign still stood upright in the front yard, but now it looked more like a relic than a threat. Its edges softened by frost, its purpose long gone. I brushed the snow off the porch railing and watched the light hum above me, steady as a heartbeat. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to guard the house. It was guarding me. Lydia came by that afternoon with 2 mugs of cocoa and a box of old photos she'd found in her attic. "I figured you'd want these," she said, setting them on the porch swing. Her breath fogged in the cold air. I smiled. "That's generous of you." She shrugged. "Maybe I'm just decluttering my guilt." We both laughed softly, the kind of laugh you can only share after surviving something together. She looked different now, less defensive, more human. "You keeping the house, then?" she asked. "I think so," I said. "But I want you to bring your kids here. Let them see where they come from." Lydia nodded slowly. "They've been asking about him, about the light you keep on. It's his," I said. "It always will be." We sat for a while sipping cocoa, watching the snow collect on the steps. The sound of distant church bells drifted through the air, muffled by the cold. She looked at me and said, "You know, I used to hate this porch. Every time Grandpa called me out here after dark, I thought it was because I'd done something wrong. But now I get it. He just wanted to see that we made it home." I turned my face toward the glow of the bulb above us. He knew the light mattered more than the words. Later that evening, after Lydia left, I brought the photo box inside and spread the pictures across the table. There we were, me and Lydia as kids. Grandpa in his overalls, the dog that used to sleep under the swing. I found one of Grandpa standing next to the porch post, hammer in hand, smiling just slightly. On the back, he'd written in his crooked script, "Every handprint in this house means someone cared." That line stayed with me all night. It reminded me of how easily we forget to care, how fast love turns to pride when no one's paying attention. I made a promise right there to keep paying attention. To the house, to the people in it, to what holds us together. A week later, I had the roof repaired and the porch steps sanded down. The contractor was an old neighbor, Don Miller, who used to help Grandpa fix fences. "You done good, Maggie," he said, as he packed up his tools. "Lot of folks would have just sold it and walked away." "I almost did," I admitted. "Yeah," he said with a smile, "but you didn't. That's the part that counts." At dusk, I stood in the yard and looked at the house the way Grandpa must have seen it. Simple, honest, standing proud against the Indiana wind. The windows glowed soft amber, the porch light steady and bright. I thought of all the nights he'd waited for us to come home and how that one small light had carried more meaning than any will or paper ever could. Inside, I sat down by the fire with a pen and a blank notepad. For the first time since Grandpa's death, I wrote something without anger or fear. This house stands because of the people who refused to leave it behind. Because forgiveness is heavier than hate, but it lasts longer too. Because family, like light, only fades if we let it. When I finished, I slipped the note into the same drawer where Grandpa had left his letters. Someday someone else might find it. Maybe they'd understand what it cost to keep a light burning. Before bed, I went out one last time. The yard was quiet, snow crunching under my boots. Across the street, a few porch lights glowed faintly through the fog like a constellation of small, stubborn stars. I stood at the top step and whispered, "We're okay now, Grandpa." The bulb above me flickered once, then steadied again, golden and alive. I smiled, turned toward the house, and closed the door. The light stayed on. Yeah. If this story reminded you of a place you once called home, or a promise you've been meaning to keep, tell someone. Don't let the light go out.